Hey, I'm back with my vintage Team Associated RC10 B2 that I'm going to once again put up against the field of the newer gen buggies. So stick around, I'll show you a couple of changes I'm going to make to this since last time, share some race highlights, and of course, my results. If you didn't catch the original video about this project, here's a real quick recap. I had this old B2 I never raced sitting on a shelf for 20 some years and decided to get it race ready and put it up against the newer buggies to see if it could hang. I wanted to keep it as vintage as possible, and that included keeping the original brushed motor, Novak speed controller, and the old 75 MHz FM radio. It turns out keeping that old radio was a bad idea, as I was getting hits on occasion and the car would just turn right for no reason. Cost me a couple of races actually. So I had to concede that old radio idea and eventually switched it out with a newer 2.4. The other change I needed to make was the rear wheels. When getting this ready for the first time last fall, I needed to put new tires on, and as simple as that sounds, it wasn't, and it resulted in a domino effect of parts that needed to be swapped out on the back end. This is all in the original video if you care to see the entire spectacle, but long story short, the result was that the overall width in the rear was too narrow. You can see the difference when compared to the width at the front. It worked, but obviously not ideal, as the narrower rear made the buggy less stable, but also the large offset of the wheels limited the suspension adjustments, specifically the shock position and hub spacing, so that nothing would rub. I managed to find some wheels with a 0 or close to 0 offset. Not easy to find, by the way, but it turns out Traxxas makes some. Putting those on will increase the overall width and fix the stance. And of course, new tires to go along with it. These are pin spikes. Not my first choice, but if you're looking for anything other than carpet tires, selection is pretty limited. Around here anyway.
A few moments later.
Okay, new wheels and tires are on. Everything went on the way it should have, and now you can see the rear track is just as wide as the front, the way it should be, so that's good. Also, now that I have the room with the wheels spaced out more, I moved the shocks out on the A-arms. Our track's pretty loose, so I just wanted to be sure that I had plenty of hookup under acceleration. Took it out for a few test laps, and turns out that was detrimental. Firstly, our track is not very smooth. It's pretty bumpy, and after that change, the car just didn't absorb the bumps as well as it did before. Didn't really feel planted. But secondly, and most importantly, the decrease in on-power steering was significant. And our track doesn't have any sharp turns. It's not like we have a hairpin at the end of every straightaway where you can coast through, pivot around on your drag brake. All the turns are big, sweeping, high-speed turns where you're pretty much on throttle most of the time through the turn. And if your car doesn't turn well under power at this track, you're going to have a bad time. This is footage of some test laps after I undid that change, and you can see that the turns are all, big, sweeping, high-speed turns where you're on power most of the time. And while I was undoing that change and putting these back to where they were, I was thinking, why did I do that in the first place? I mean, after all, I've got a stock brushed motor, doesn't have a lot of punch to begin with, and I'm running on new tires. I didn't really need any more hookup in the rear anyway. So I got some of that on-power steering back. Now, it's still not super awesome steering under power, but there's some other adjustments I can make to fix that. I got options. Here's some footage of the heat races now, and anytime you see a little call out with the arrow, that's my car. And one of the things we added to the track this year, though, that we took from the Supercross was the addition of a joker lane. And the joker lane is just an additional loop or route in the track there that the drivers have to take at least once per race. So they can take it on the first lap, they can do it on the last lap, or anywhere in between, as long as they take it one time per race. And I usually take that as soon as possible just to get it out of the way, and then also make sure that I don't forget later on. Something you probably noticed though is that the picture's a bit grainy, and that's just because of the lack of bright light. You know, the camera's trying to adjust for low light conditions. Now when we're racing, we can see just fine. It's just the camera doesn't pick it up too well, so it's hard to distinguish whose car is whose by the paint. But you can always tell my car because it makes a lot of noise. And not that there's something wrong with it, it's just that I never put the cover over the spur gear, so you can hear all that gear mesh going. So yeah, when a car goes by and it makes a bunch of racket, that's me. This is the second buggy heat, and you might notice that we're running the opposite direction, which is a change we made in the format, which is we're gonna run every other race the opposite direction just to keep things more interesting. And you know, normally when I'm running this buggy, because it does have somewhat of a disadvantage speed-wise to the other ones, I got to run mistake-free in order to, well, have a chance, you know. But when running this direction, since nobody really has figured out the flow of the track yet, as you can imagine, it's quite different. Don't have to run mistake-free because everybody else is making a lot of mistakes too. But I did win heat number 2, so first win with the B2, going backwards no less. This is footage of the buggy main event here, and we did have a heat number 3, which I also won, by the way. And the heat number 4 was kind of a wreck. I don't know what was with everybody. They couldn't keep it on the track and running into each other and all that, and I still managed a second, but I don't know how I did because I wasn't driving that well either. Anyway, this is the buggy main, and I guess it's kind of silly for us to have a main event when everyone's going to make it anyway, which just makes the heat races practice, I guess. So, but I guess your overall finish in the heat races does determine your starting order in the main. And I did TQ. Therefore, I got to start out front in the main, and therefore avoid some of the carnage that can happen on the start. So that's good. This is a 20-lap race, and I led pretty much the first half of the race, and then could not avoid a, let's just say, an impaired driver. Got hung up on a pipe and subsequently lost what was about a half a lap lead. And so I spent the next 7 or 8 laps just basically trying to reel in the new leader. The buggy class in our club isn't really that competitive. Nobody really runs their buggies too often, myself included, so none of us are really super fast, so it's not like I'm out here trying to school a bunch of factory drivers or anything. Now, I'm competing against B5Ms and B6s, and those newer gen buggies, the ones with the mid-motor, they were designed to run on high bite tracks, and this track is exactly not that. We do water the track, and the conditions here were probably closer to medium bite than low bite, but whether it's low or medium traction conditions, I could run my B2 with faster and more consistent laps than my B6 all day long. With the B6, in those conditions, you just can't seem to get the power down and keep the back end behind you, and it's almost like you just kind of have to pussyfoot around the track just to keep it between the pipes. And even in the so-called D or dirt configuration with the stand-up transmission where you can move some of the weight rearward, it can still be a handful. So I contend that there is still a place for a rear motor buggy. However, all that being said, you still do have to know how to drive. Back at the race at hand here though, 5 laps to go, I am still trying to reel in the leader. I've been closing the gap every lap by a couple of feet or so. And I finally catch up and we bump just a little bit, almost take each other out, but gather it up. He's still got the lead though with 4 to go, but I'm right on his tail, and I don't think he can handle the pressure, and he can't. He gets a little squirrely coming out of the turn and slides in front of me and then takes himself out. And so, fortunately, he didn't take me out though. And that was a shame too, because it was a lot of fun running, pretty much neck and neck with this guy the entire race. And I even thought about maybe slowing up a bit, letting them catch up so we could duke it out for the last couple of laps. But then I thought better of it because I really wanted to get that first main event victory with the B2. So yeah, last couple of laps I just ran my race, didn't make any big mistakes, got the win, mission accomplished. Well, it was a pretty good night. Anytime that you can spend time with friends, having some beers, playing with your little toys is a pretty good night. The racing was pretty good too. And although I did win the main event with the Buggy, I did fall short of my goal from last time, which was to sweep the Buggy races. I ended up coming in second in like 2 of the qualifiers, but a couple of tweaks to this on the setup and a couple of less stupid mistakes on the track, and I'll get there. Also, what I happened to find was digging around, sitting in the bag for 20 years, is this brand new B2 body. Thought I had stumbled across a hidden gem, and but it turns out, I guess, that J Concept still makes B2 Buggy bodies, so I guess it's not as rare as I thought. But hoping to have this painted up in my scheme for next time, a little bit brighter colors, be easier to see on the track, especially under the cameras there. So keep an eye out for that. Hey, be sure to give us a thumbs up on the video. It really helps the channel. Also, let us know what kind of content you'd like to see us do on our RC videos. We really appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.